ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how.
Hey there, this is Matt Petrowski bringing you these FileMaker videos from my website, FileMakerMagazine.com. In this video, we are continuing a series where we're taking a look at building out a FileMaker solution. I'm building a database for myself for the purpose of building a home, or managing a home, or all the different things. It's a complex project. But we're taking a look at continuing with the design stage, and we are looking at some styles in this particular video. So let's head to my desktop and take a look. All right, so glad you are wanting to learn more about FileMaker Pro. I'm going to show you what I can in the time that we have, and it is about styles and how I deal with styles. Now, in the previous episode in this series, which if you're interested in the series and you're watching this on YouTube, there should be a link in the description down below that actually takes you to the full series. I talked about getting the proportions that I want. In fact, there's a comment on the previous article or the previous video where I talked about the golden ratio, and somebody contributed a FileMaker custom function that does that. So thank you very much. Don't have the name right off the top of my head, but what we're doing in this particular video is creating my styles. I'm going to show you the home database. Now, what we have on screen is not the home database. This is actually, I mentioned that I had created the Apex Blue theme, the default theme being used in FileMaker 19 and higher, and I really didn't have the sample files. Well, it turns out the sample files were made available. You can get those at this particular domain right here, templates.fm. Now, iSolutions was the company that I worked through in order to create the theme for Claris, and so if you want to see how the template of Apex Blue is used, I am going to show you in this video actually underneath the hood and explain a little bit about default styles and how and why you don't want to modify those. I'll explain that, and I'll also be showing you something really pretty magical. Let's take a look at this. When I designed Apex Blue, I did it in a monochromatic. Let's hide this window so it's a little simple. I did things in a monochromatic format so that the theme itself could be changed. And when you have a monochromatic theme, it's a lot easier. You're not dealing with what's known as complementary colors. Those are colors that complement each other, like red and green for Christmas, etc. There's all kinds of online tools that you can use, and maybe we'll take a look at that a little bit later in the video, but I wanted to be able to make it so that the blue that we have here on screen can easily be changed. Now, there isn't a tool that really makes this easy to do. It's actually in the core, or in the underneath stuff. The CSS is embedded within the XML. But in FileMaker, what they did is they made it such that as I go to Manage and then we go to Themes, in FileMaker, they made it so that more and more things can be copied and pasted in FileMaker. Now, here we can see that the default theme currently is Apex Blue. Now, in FileMaker, when you modify a theme, as soon as you modify any one object that has a style, you inherently have modified the default theme, which is saved within the actual FileMaker application on disk, and it's read from disk into your FileMaker file. And that CSS is then stored, and on a per layout basis, each layout can use a different theme. Now, typically, as I explained in the previous video, you want to have just one theme that you use. Now, when I select this here, I can't actually copy this default theme because of the brackets indicating it's a default. But I can click the duplicate button right here, and it will make a copy of that theme. Now, we can always see how many of the layouts are using a particular theme. But with this one being duplicated now, which also you can duplicate, as I did in the previous video, you can duplicate it within the sidebar area in the inspector. I can now copy this. So if I just go up to the edit menu, we can see that we have the copy here, or Command C, Control C if you're on Windows. I copy this, and this is what's so great. What I'm showing you is, as of the recording of this video, an unreleased tool that allows you to modify and manipulate pretty much anything that you can copy and paste within FileMaker. That includes layout elements, scripts, etc. We're not done with it yet, hence why I'm calling it a beta tool, but watch what happens when I click on the Get button here. it will actually pull that off of the clipboard, and currently we don't see anything here. This is normally a list of all the different layout objects. That's where you're most commonly making a lot of edits. But when we click on this XML button in here, what we can see is underneath the hood what this theme is and information about it. So for example, it is not a default theme, and we can see that because by default, this is what would say com.filemaker.theme. And then it would be Apex Blue. But in this particular case, what we get is something that says custom, and then it has a UUID. So anytime that you duplicate a theme within FileMaker, it gets its own unique ID. Now, in order to make modifications to this, I could take the time to scroll through and deal with all of this code. This is all the CSS. You can see right here, for example, radio set, normal, icon. So this is just one of the many different facets of a field that's formatted as a radio button or a radio set, as the CSS is calling it. Now, all of the CSS values, it would be a real pain in order to modify all of these. And let's say I just want to go from the blue to a pink look. Well, using my tool here, which again, it's beta, it's not available, I apologize, but I wanted to show you that it's somewhat difficult, but not too difficult. If I go over to the details here and I click on this little palette icon, and it may not be the palette icon in the final tool, what I can see is I can scroll through and see all of the colors that are in this theme. Now, once you have a tool like this, it's not too difficult in order to modify things. And whenever you're dealing with color in FileMaker, even if you're in FileMaker itself, if I go into FileMaker and let's say I selected this top navigation and I wanted to go over to the third area, the Appearance tab, and I wanted to select this color because I'm going to change this color. When we choose this other color, the best option to use within a color palette is to go to this second area, and on Windows it's somewhat the same, but sometimes it's defaulting to RGB. Now RGB, you can see this is extremely difficult for me to deal with choosing a color in here. The best tool to use whenever you're dealing with colors is an HSB, or also it'll be referred to as HSV sometimes, and that's hue, saturation, and brightness, or it's hue, saturation, and value, which we're going to see over in the tool. So here what we get to choose is we get to choose, and it goes all the way around. It makes a full circle in terms of the color spectrum. So you can see if I go all the way up to the top here, it will be 359 or roughly 360. If I go all the way to the bottom, it'll be 0. So you'll notice that it's red on this end and then it's red on this other end. So red is the color that's split in the around the world way that colors are used. Then saturation, brightness, those are super easy and super obvious. So knowing that we want to deal with it in that situation, as I click undo here and get everything, wow, I don't know what FileMaker did there, but all those different colors, it had gone through all those different colors to set that. I want to now make sweeping changes to this theme. In other words, I want to make this whole theme icons and everything, and it doesn't apply to conditional formatting, which we will see, into one setting. So as I scroll here, I can see at the very bottom the way that this tool that I'm creating here with another developer, the blue colors start right here. Now we can see that there is a hue right here where I can change this by simply dragging it to whatever hue I want. So let's say I'm going to a green color and that second green color comes up. So for this color, I'm going to put this green color, and there will be a hex value setting that I'll have in this tool, but I can see that it's 97. So watch how quick this is for me to change this blue theme to a green theme. It's the reason that I told you in the previous video that I really don't worry about colors too much, primarily because I have this tool for myself. It will eventually be available to everybody else, but I just wanted to show you that colors can be universally and sweepingly changed at one time. So let's just copy that 97. I'll select here, and then I'll paste. And then I'll select the next one, and I'll paste. And then I'll select the next one, and I'll paste. And select the next one, and I paste. So basically all we're doing here is we're changing the hue just to a different place on the color spectrum. So it's actually really fast to do. And we'll click that one, and then we'll click this one. And then we've got a couple more here. Bear with me. And this last blue, I don't think it's used actually in the theme. So we have just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 colors that are used. I click on the apply button, and those colors have now been changed. I go over, and that means that the XML has been changed across this whole range of the XML. Everywhere where a particular color stood out actually changed. And you can see in the XML, you can see where you can make changes. So Apex Blue Copy, if I wanted this to be a different name, I'll just highlight this and just call it Apex Green. So I can make changes to the XML directly here if I know that the change is something that I want. So when I click the Set button, and it tells me that it's been set, and I come over to the solution, we can go to the Manage and the Themes, and in the Themes area now, when I paste this, you can see that Apex Green comes in. Now, the great thing about this, and the wonderful use of this tool, is that if you have a super complex theme with a lot of custom styles, then all of those custom styles, they stay there. They're right within all of the XML that you have copied. They don't change. Their names don't change. Nothing changes. Just the colors change, or whatever you want to change. There's also, up at the top, this ability to use a find and replace if there's an absolute unique thing that you want to change. Let's say you wanted to change a specific background image that we have right here. You would be able to find all of those and replace all of them sweepingly across the XML. But over here in the solution, I should be able to go into layout mode now, and those quick changes, if I switch to the Apex Green here, we should see that it's basically just universal across the board. So there you see the green was changed, all the icons, all the text. The only thing that isn't changed universally is conditional formatting. So this particular blue that's still right here, I would have to go into layout mode, and I would have to select what I can see right here, according to the icon that conditional formatting is turned on. I would have to select right here and then right click. And of course, that's really easy to do because I would be able to get this green by simply selecting anything that does have the green, click, double click, copy the hex code. I would now go back over to this, select, choose my conditional formatting, and then I would be able to go in and select this color right here, double click, paste. In order to accept, you have to click right here in order to accept that. But now I would just need to do that across all of the conditional formatting. But here's the crazy thing. Even in that layout, I would be able to, using this tool, and I hate hyping something that isn't actually ready, I'd be able to copy everything on this layout. So any conditional formatting included in this, I would be able to come over here and click Get. And what we're going to see is it will parse all of those objects. And I would be able to, say, for example, do sweeping changes across the whole of this solution, looking for any of those things either directly in the XML, or as you can see, we've got a list of all of the different objects. And I can filter based on these objects. And I can also click on them individually and actually edit their CSS. As we can see right here, I can click on the CSS for a specific object and then change that. When it comes to the conditional formatting, I would actually have to edit that directly in the XML. But enough of that for the tool. We're going to switch over now, and I'm going to show you. That's the change that I make. Let's say I wanted Apex Blue to be Apex Green for my theme, which is what I started with in the home database, the home building database. But now I'm going to start to set up my styles. And so now I'm going to walk you through the process that I use as I'm setting up styles. We're going to style the sidebar, style some other things, and start to put in some of our own custom styles and talk about the defaults and why I don't actually use the defaults. And I'll show you an actual example. All right, so we are in the file that I'm working on, and of course, as I add things to the file, if you're a subscriber over at FileMakerMagazine.com and I add new features and functionality in here and you just want to copy and paste the code, you'll be able to get that file as a subscriber over at FileMaker Magazine. Otherwise, for this series, I'm putting out this information for free. So there will be code that will be valuable in the file as I develop the file and move it forward. So the reason that I don't that I create new styles instead of modifying the defaults. And there are a few things that I'll modify on the defaults, but very, very few things, and only things that are currently set when it comes to styles. As we go into layout mode here, we'll take our standard field as an example. And this standard field, when the field is selected, we can always see whether it's a default or not by going to the third area, which is the Appearance tab. And we can see that this is a default. Now, I can see that the default has been modified by the indication of the star and the fact that it's red. If I want to reset this default, what I'm going to do is select on that, and I am going to choose this option of Revert Changes to Style. Now, when I do that, it's going to go back. Now, the only thing I had done is I had made that bold on that particular field. But let's understand why I don't add certain things to a default. And let's talk about the default itself. So the default has a number of states, and this applies to buttons, button bars. They have more states, actually. But from the standpoint of a field, we've got these states. And let's zoom in a little bit more here. We've got normal, which has all of the settings such as the font, etc. Then you have hover, pressed, and focus. So why is it not a good idea to modify or add hover, pressed, or in focus to a default style? Well, let's take a look at it underneath the hood. Underneath the hood, I'm going to copy this and go over to my handy dandy tool, click on the Get button. And this tool is hosted, by the way, so when you see that spinning, it's actually spinning because it's network latency and communication. But with this, what we can do is we can go look at the CSS. So in this tool, we're going to look at this particular object. Now, there's two different areas in FileMaker's objects of whether something has been modified. That's the little star, or when things go red, versus the what is preset to that style. Everything within full CSS is preset to the style. Now, this particular style was not modified, meaning I reverted it, and I did not take a copy of a something that had red on it, which we will look at. Actually, let's go ahead and do it now. Let's go look at what I do. So I am going to simply just make one change to this. I'm going to make it bold. That has changed this object from the default to a modified default, which we can see right here. So I'm going to copy this now to the clipboard. And over here, what we will not see in this whole area is we will not see something called local CSS as opposed to full CSS. So when I click Get, what we're going to see is when this new object comes in and we scroll up a little bit, you're going to see something that's been added. So full CSS is what we were just looking at, but we have this whole area right here of local CSS. Now, this local CSS is what's called an override. It is overriding something on the normal state of this particular field. We can see that the override has been applied of bold, but as well, there's also an override of the font family. Now, I didn't change the font family, but that's just something that FileMaker does internally. Now, here's the difficulty when we start to modify defaults, and it gets really, really bad. Let's take a look at the full CSS for all of the different states. Currently, we're looking at the normal. As we scroll up, we can see all of the CSS that FileMaker has in it. We can even, as we scroll down, see FileMaker-specific flags, which is really pretty interesting to see these old things. Some of them herald all the way back to when FileMaker was older. Some of them are still used because of FileMaker's UI. But as we scroll down, we can see that on this field, there is a hover state setting, but the only thing that's being modified are borders. There are no fonts. There's nothing that's being modified. On the focus, we also have some border styles. Now, these are what I would consider acceptable settings. And other than that, there are no other changes. The pressed state, which doesn't apply to fields, but the states that we want to have set minimally are things that we fundamentally want there. So now let's go see what happens when we go make a change to this. One, we've already made the change of setting it to bold, but now let's set something like something silly here. Let's scroll this in. I'm going to go to the hover state and do something that I would never do. I'm going to change the font on the hover state to Courier, and then I'm going to go to the pressed state of the button, and I am going to change that to Monaco, and then I'm going to go to the in focus, and let's say I'm going to make some changes there. I'll change this to another font to Consolas. So here is the danger. If I was to select this and save these changes to the current style, I would be literally ruining this theme. And that is because all other styles spawn off of the default. And what I've done right now, if I saved the changes to this style, and then I saved the theme, which this would become red, that means that every other field that was based off of the default that did not have a font on the hover, pressed, and in focus now does, because everything cascades from the default. So it is really, really a bad idea to add things to the default. You can change things. For example, if for the whole of my solution I wanted to sweepingly change the font, I would be able to select that font on the normal state, change the font from Helvetica New to some other setting, let's say American Typewriter, and that would cascade to all other styles that had been created off of the default. Because when we go look at this over in the tool and inspect this, I click the Get button. And currently it'll be in the local CSS. We will see that. But what would happen is if I saved it to the theme, everything that is in the local CSS would be pushed into the full CSS, and all other objects would cascade of that. And this font right here, all of these wonky font changes would just be really hideously bad. So that's why I want to impress upon you that when you're starting out and you're using your theme, and you can roll these back. With this tool, I would be able to fix a theme where you have set or accidentally modified the defaults. You would be able to roll them back by modifying the theme, taking settings off of states and rolling the defaults back to a minimal set, and then pushing that exact same theme in, because all the named styles are remembered. This would be a theme fixer tool, I guess. It's not how it started out, but it could be used as that. That is what we would do. So now that we've discussed why we don't want to modify the default, let's take a look at how we start from the default, don't add our modifications, and save and name our new styles within our theme so that we start to evolve the theme in a way that really makes it easy for us to then use the whole solution. So let's take a look at that. All right, are you ready? All right, this is the cool stuff. This is what you want to do when you've started with a fresh theme, like Apex Blue or something that's got transparent. It also has just basic settings, a little bit of color, and you're now going to add supplementary colors and styles that mean something to your solution. So this is what I do. In my home project here, and another thing to think about is it's always a good idea to beg, borrow, and steal. Take from other files if there's other styles that you want, and then add them or adopt them into your style. So first off, let's take a look at what I would do here in this scenario, where rather than modifying this default, I will not choose the save changes. I will revert the default. I want a bolded version of the default field. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to bold, and now I'm going to give it a new name. Now the names that you choose as we go to this second area within the inspector, really what you want to do, and what I did in Apex Blue, is I decided I wanted to use, I forget if I'm using semantic or non-semantic names, but essentially if you use something too specific, then that specificity sometimes doesn't actually apply anymore. So for example, if I was to call this particular style for this field 14-point bold, and then somewhere down the line I choose not to go with 14 points and I want to use 16 points, I was too specific with my naming. So it's better to use, for example, small, medium, large, instead of 14 point, 16 point, 18 point, where you've got something specific in there. So for this, I'm going to try to describe it as best as possible in terms of what it means. And I can definitely use the word default, because in this list of the styles, we also want to take advantage of the fact that FileMaker is going to alphabetically group things. So you can see right here, we've got transparent, and then all other transparents use that as a prefix: transparent, transparent, bordered, transparent, centered. So because I have only applied a bold to this, and I am not going to save the default, what I'm going to choose to do is I'm going to choose to save as a new style, and FileMaker will bring this dialog up, and sometimes it's all over the place, but I am going to follow theme here now. Because this is named default, I am going to call this default bolded. Or if I was to use the web terminology, it would be default strong. So what this does is it creates a new style now where I can choose from the default or from default strong, and I know that the default is going to be what I want it to be, but the default strong is also inheriting from the actual default. So this is where we get into that situation where I talked about things that are already set on the default. You can change and it will cascade, but you don't want to add things to the default because you can't take them off of styles created from the default. So we choose our option right here to save changes to theme. That saves those changes. Now we can take a look at what happens, because this is where we can see the result of our efforts. Now I just duplicated the field by option dragging it, and I'll set it to the default, and watch what happens when we modify one of the settings that is set to the default. We'll go over to our appearance. We'll scroll down, and we no longer want Helvetica New. We want to use, say, for example, Courier. And I'm not afraid to make this change on the default because it already is set for the normal state. I'm on the normal state. I can confirm that by going up and double checking that I'm on the normal state. Normal will cascade to all other substates. So in other words, normal cascades to hover, pressed. Everything defers to the normal state. So if hover doesn't have a font, it'll use normal. Same with pressed, same with focused. That's why we don't want to modify the default. We want to modify our others. I think you get the point. But when I change this to Courier for the default, and I now save the default, knowing that I've only modified something that already is set, not adding to it, when I save that and then save the theme, everything should have cascaded. This, for example, this is unfortunately, if you remember a while ago when we copied, one of the things that happened is when we looked at this, when we copied it, FileMaker did take along the font name. Now, I don't know why they chose to do this with the font name, but it applies more to the styling, such as the borders and other things that cascades to the other states is what we're mostly interested in. So in this particular case, I picked a bad example, unfortunately. That example is that it took both the name and the fact that the font weight was bold. We saw that when I copied it, and I would have to actually change this one to Courier as well and save that default strong and then save the state right here. So now when I save it, both the default and that particular style are now going to be, I had to make an extra step, but for other settings, what you find is that you want to create those variant styles and you want to name them accordingly. So let's go through one more style. I'm going to set up the sidebar as I roll this back from Courier back to Helvetica New for what I want, and then we'll wrap up the video. Okay, so let's move forward with styling our sidebar, and let's beg, borrow, and steal from another file. So as I bring a file on screen, if there is a solution out there that you have access to and you can get into layout mode, then of course you want to use something from that if the styling has already been applied. So for example, over here, when I go into browse mode and I select in a field, I've got this particular color. It's the blue. It mixes with the green. I haven't swapped out this theme using my tool yet. I can do that. But over here, let's say, for example, I like this particular search. And look, there, that search has the green on it. So here's the thing you need to be careful of when you do copy styles from another place. You're going to have to be able to swap the colors, either using some type of tool or using, it's the Base Elements plugin that allows you to get things off of the clipboard. Well, Monkey Bread can too, and other plugins. You can use the plugin itself raw, get the raw XML and do your own find and replace, or wait for the tool, or if the tool's already released, do that. But recognize that there may be changes that you need to make when you borrow. So if I don't want to take the time to make a rounded search field, I'm just going to go into this field, copy it, come over to my file, go into the layout mode, and then paste it, fully with the intention of just borrowing the style. Now, if all of my fields are laid out, such as right here, I already have my search field. If it's already in the precise location that I want, all I'm doing is I'm adopting this style from the other solution, and then I'm going to save it in my solution. So when I select this, what we're going to see is it's going to say, well, it's default. Well, it was a default in another file with other styling. It's not a default from my file. FileMaker only recognizes it as the default because it came from another file. So we absolutely do not want to click this. We absolutely do want to click Save as New Style, which in this case, I will call this Search Rounded. Remember, classing things, if it deals with search. Now, in this particular case, this is not necessarily specific to search, but we'll see when I style the sidebar, it's sort of how I start to think about my solution, because it's the mnemonic that I use as I go throughout the development or the evolution of the solution. So in this case, it might be better to actually just start with something like rounded field, which it'll be grouped within the fields anyway, so I don't have to necessarily call it field. But in this case, if I was going to use this for something other than search, then I might want to do that. If I'm using a style specifically for a given feature, then that's what I like to do, is I like to call out the feature within the name of the style itself. So in this case, we're going to call this rounded field. Now that I have the style, I can legitimately just select this and get rid of it. I can delete it. All I did is I copied it from the other solution, put it into my solution just for the purpose of being able to do that save. And now I'll save the changes to the theme, and I have that particular style in here. So we can see right here, rounded field. There it is right there. So because I copied the style from another solution, I can go to my field, which is in place where I want it, and just simply select rounded field, and I now have the style applied to my object, which was in place, and I just basically took the work that somebody else did, which was applying the styling. Now in this case, we're going to see when I click in here, this does have the green, which is opposite to when I select in a field, which currently has the blue because the theme is different. So whenever you copy styles from another location, recognize that you may have to make individual tweaks and changes. So you're going to see that when you use it in layout and browse mode, but you can also go through the styles as well. So the final thing is, let's style this sidebar. So by default, Apex Blue only has the core objects of FileMaker styled. I'm going to start to style my objects as I evolve my solution based on their area of use, as I just explained a little bit earlier. So this sidebar over here currently has the default portal. Well, I don't want a default portal for this. A sidebar is almost always going to be on the side, on the left side, for me, for a master detail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the changes that I want, not going to save as the default once those changes are made, going to save as a new style. And as a matter of practice, it's actually a good idea. From the first time that you make the first change to anything, save it right then. It's just a lot easier to do. I don't always do it, but I try to. So I have the portal currently selected. We can see that it's the portal here. And what I'm going to do is the first thing I'm going to do is turn off all of my edges. And I'm only going to turn on the one edge that would be seen, which is going to be the edge that's exposed within the layout. And that's going to be the leftmost edge. So by turning that on, right off, I am going to now save as a new style. And this is, I wish they would somehow move this to the bottom, because I have made on accidentally clicked the mouse and saved the changes to the current when it's the default. And to me, that's really scary. I don't like it, but that's how they have it set up. So I'm going to save this as a new style. And here's where we get into the naming. There may be other areas. This is the thought process that I go through. I'm thinking, is this specific, and will it most likely only be used for the sidebar across multiple layouts? If that's the case, then that's when I name it the style specific to that feature, allowing myself to say, okay, I could use this in another place. There could be another place where I have something shoved up to the left edge, and I want the right border turned on. So in that case, if I was creating a style that would be more generally used, I try to think of a name that's a little bit more general. But in this case, I'm going to call it Sidebar, and I might call it Sidebar Right Edge, just giving myself an indication of what this is. Or for the most part, I like to keep it really simple, like Sidebar Portal. Now, why add the word portal? It would be cool if I could just call this Sidebar. But the trick is there's going to be other styles that I'll be creating where FileMaker will not allow me to use the same name twice. You'll notice that in Apex Blue, the word transparent on different objects is possible to have multiple times. Like on a field, you'll have just a style named transparent. And on a portal, you'll have a style called transparent. Now, you can only do that in a theme at the time that the theme is originally created. Anytime that you're creating styles inside of FileMaker, every single name has to be unique unless you know how to modify or tweak the theme. So in this case, I am going to have to call this Sidebar Portal because I'll end up having a sidebar button as well. And we'll click OK, and we'll save the changes to the theme. So I now have my sidebar, and that is taking off the hard edge so that it doesn't blend with the edge of the window. I don't have an edge up on the top. I'm just going to have this right here. And let's say I want to blend this so that the sidebar feels the same across the full height. Let's go ahead and do that. So we'll zoom out here. And how would I address that? Well, there's a couple of ways. I could just add the line tool, and I could add a line up here up at the top, but that really doesn't give me a whole lot of flexibility. In fact, you'll notice that in the Apex Blue theme, one of the choices that I made intentionally was that when we select the default theme or the default objects, which this formerly was a default object, when we look at the fill, we can see that the fill is none. We can also go to, for the portal, we can go to the portal row, and again, you can see that this is none. Now, there's a reason for this. A lot of times you want to show or be able to control things from either based on the style or from whatever comes behind. So in this scenario, what I would do is I would create, and let me turn off the, I'm going to go to the position here, and I'm going to turn off my snap to grid and off my show to grid. And we are going to, actually, I do want the snap on. So I like to see where things snap, and we also want to snap our scroll right there. Went really fast. Let's snap it to that. I'm going to send this to the back. Select my portal, make sure that my portal is snapping to that as well. So in this scenario, I've got a rectangle now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my styling for it, and like the portal, I'm going to turn off all of my lines, turn on my solid line, and I'm going to you can see that the default for a rectangle is actually a transparent. It is a solid color, but it's set to a transparent color here on Apex Blue. So what I'm going to do is for this rectangle, rather than, I'm going to save as a new style always. This rectangle is being used as a background for the sidebar portal, which is transparent that I can see through, and you'll see the benefits right here. What am I going to call it? Sidebar rectangle. Because it's dealing with that particular area of the solution. It's okay for me to create a style for one specific use case. If the style is used for multiple, then I'm just going to name it more generically for all of those different cases. So I also might want to call this sidebar background. I really like to think what is going to be the easiest for somebody else to see when we get into this situation. So as you know, and what I'm going to do is also go here, and for that rectangle, I'm going to intentionally choose the auto sizing. Anytime the window is dragged taller, I want to make sure that as the window is dragged, that background is going to drag. I would also do that to the portal. So as I select the portal, we can see that it already is anchored to the left edge, top and bottom as well. Remember your anchoring. And let's go ahead and make that portal a little bit longer. I'm going to double click and make it, I don't know if 20 is going to resize my layout. Let's see. It does not right there. So we actually fit perfect right there with 20. So with that situation now, what I'm able to do is in the whole of my solution, what's going to end up happening is I'm going to be copying this sidebar and moving it to many different layouts. That means that I want to have this sidebar be as simple and easy to control as possible. And what we're going to see in the next video in this series is the different types of portals and whether you're going to use a self-relationship or FileMaker's default for a portal, which is the current master detail, or basically being able to see the found set. So let's make one other change right here really quickly. I have a row already in here, a button, I believe, which we'll go over here. We'll go to this. Yes, we can see that it is a normal button. It's not a button bar. I might change that to a button bar because button bars allow us to access FileMaker's calculation engine. But for right now, I am going to style this by simply going to making the alignment to the right. I'm also going to follow my grid, which if you watched the previous video in this series, you'll know that our grid is at 12. So I want to bump that off of the edge right there. I might not need the top and the bottom because I know I'm going to be vertically centered. And you can also see that as a container object, the portal allows me to drag an object out super far. And that way, if the text extended out, it wouldn't try to wrap at this point if I made this specifically that width. If I drag it out, that text can extend beyond the edge of the portal, which is a really nice thing. I'll also show you a little trick here that when we resize things, which I will use the resize here. Is it going to show me? It won't show me right now currently. I forget which handle I'd have to go on. It actually resized my portal a little bit long there. And I'll show that in the next video, the tip about aligning this up and doing those things, give you a reason to come back. But with this selected, I made modifications to my style. We never want to leave things with the red on, so I am going to save changes to new style. And of course, what am I going to do? I'm going to call it sidebar. Now, what is this? Sometimes I think of this, a button in a sidebar might be something that I will put into a sidebar. So I want to think about this in terms of before I choose a name, I'm always questioning myself, is it possible that something else this would apply to more obviously? So a button to me is something that would be within a portal row. And this is clicking on, at least from the perspective of the user, clicking on a row. So rather than calling it sidebar button, what I end up calling it is sidebar row, even though this is styling for a button. So we say OK, and we save our changes. And what we're going to see now is we have a sidebar row click, or let's look at them as we select them. We've got a sidebar row, we've got a sidebar portal, and then we've got if I select it here, a sidebar background. Now what makes really nice, or what becomes really nice here is when you do a show all, they're grouped according to their object types, but as you look through them, you have grouped them all into that sidebar category in terms of naming the style. And even if you're going to use it somewhere else, who cares? You still remember and think of it as the sidebar style. And of course, as we all know, making a change to this style for all other layouts that have this particular theme set, which hopefully all of your other layouts, it's sweeping and universal. So if I wanted the background to simply be a different color, of course I would choose the color, change it, save that style, and my whole solution gets all of those changes. So I hope in this video, it hasn't been too long, you've been able to learn a little bit more. In the next video, as I stated, we're going to go through the portal itself and how and why I make decisions about using a particular portal, which features and what advantages they have with regards to navigation in my solution here. But that's what I have for this video. As always, I'd like to wish you much luck, and until next time, happy FileMaking.
We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.filemakermagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.